lady.
Not the only one.
Did you kill it?
Where were you, Charles?
Let's start with 1982's The Thing, only one of the greatest horror or sci-fi films ever made. You've done some theater and you've done a couple of smaller screen projects, but this was really your first major film role, right? How did you feel coming onto this one?
It was fantastic. I'm a speech teacher, and I just came off my speech teacher training. In fact, I had to leave my training just a couple of weeks early so I could go to Los Angeles to start rehearsing The Thing. I had lines like, "Hell no, do you believe this?" Anyway, the name of the course that I teach is called Good American Speech for the Theater. So I was afraid I was going to go, "Do you believe this? Do you believe any of this voodoo?"
What happened right before filming? You got into an accident?
I broke 2 bones in my hand. I had to have 2 pins put in. I still have them in there. It was right before the first day of filming. And my hand swelled up like a boxing glove. So when we began filming, I had stitches. To hide my stitches, I had a latex rubber glove, cut the fingers out. It totally matched my own skin tone. But because it was still a little bit swollen, when you look at the movie, you never see my left hand until Act 2 of the movie, when I have to break down the door with a hatchet. That's the only time you ever see my exposed left hand.
The final scene. It's legendary at this point. Nearly 40 years later, we're still debating it. Do you have a theory on who was the Thing, who was infected? Was it child?
You hear all this theory and it's like, oh, come on, fellas. It's not that deep. Most of what I've read and heard is most people believe it was me because you don't see any breath coming out. We're in the cold. Right. And so you would see breath. Well, if you've ever been in front of a fire in the cold, when the wind shifts and the heat is coming at you, there's no smoke coming out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. There's too much heat. If you're on the other side of the fire where the wind is blowing away from you, yes, there's plenty because it's cold. That's my theory and I'm sticking to it. It wasn't me. That's all I can say.
Well, you would reunite with John Carpenter for another beloved horror film 6 years later with 1988's They Lived. Such a brilliant movie. Another one that took a little while to catch on, right? Did this one feel like a big swing at all at the time?
I loved it because it just hit so many nerves. You know, it was 1988. Homelessness was becoming prolific. Here you had 2 homeless people. Frank and Nato, these guys worked for a living, but they just couldn't afford housing. So they had to live in camps and stuff like that. You know, homeless people have dignity too. Today, I don't pass a homeless person without speaking. I at least recognize their humanity and say hello. That movie, when you watch it, can be enlightening in that sense because we tend to dismiss those people as screw-ups. They're but for the grace of God. So I try not to judge.
Frank and Nada come together, but not before one of the most famous scenes in that movie, their epic fist fight. I mean, what can you say about filming that sequence?
Yes, a 7-minute fight. We rehearsed for 2 weeks. It was very well choreographed and we had great fun. Love Roddy Piper. Did
you have any intimidation at all fighting a professional wrestler?
I've never come across anyone more professional than him. I hit him a couple of times by accident, getting too close, but he never hurt me in any way, shape, or form. He was always very careful and took great care of me. Showed me a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, not directed by John Carpenter, but in 1994 you would star in The Puppet Masters. I've noticed a theme to your big horror movies, and they all involve mind-controlling aliens coming down. You know something? Are you trying to tell us something?
Yes, beware.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention maybe the most horrific moment that you've been involved with on screen. And it's the moment Ben Stiller gets his Frankenbean zipped and There's Something About Mary. What do you remember about shooting that?
During Something About Mary, the first time that we saw the zipper moment, it wasn't actually him. It was mounted on a piece of wood. But when you look at it, it was like, oh my God, any man over 7 years old who has had that moment, the thought of it hurts. And I don't know what hurts more, the actual catching or trying to get out of it.
So what you're saying is that moment required very little acting.
Very little acting. That would make a grown man scream, holler, cry. That's also how you knew it was a comedy, because he wasn't sitting there bawling like a baby. If that had actually happened, he'd be too busy. Yeah.
So great to talk to you. Like I said, I've long been a fan of yours and in your work, and you just kill it in everything you're in. So this is awesome. Thank you.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks.